In the winter of 1961, a man named Dale Purcell drove 11 hours from Billings, Montana, to a gun store in Missoula and traded his father's .30-06 Springfield for a 7mm Magnum he had read about in a magazine. The article had been specific. It had named the .30-06 as adequate for deer. It had said something different about elk. It had used the word marginal. Dale Purcell was planning his first elk hunt for the following October, and he was not interested in marginal. He handed the Springfield across the counter and walked out with a rifle that kicked like a fence post and printed groups that embarrassed him at 200 yards for the rest of his life. The .30-06 he traded away had been his father's deer rifle for 22 years. His father had killed 9 elk with it. All 9 had gone down in the first minute. The article that convinced Dale Purcell to make that trade did not mention that. It was not lying about the Magnum. It was lying about what the .30-06 could not do. That is a different kind of lie. It is quieter. It sits in the gap between what a cartridge actually is and what a publication needs it to be. And it ran in the pages of American gun magazines for 40 years without a correction, because the people running those magazines had a reason to keep it running. That is the story. Most stories about the American gun press end with an accusation. This one ends with something more complicated, because the men who built the lie were often the same men who loved the cartridge. And that is what makes it impossible to look away. You need to understand what Jack O'Connor was before you can understand what the magazine industry did with him. Not the legend, the man, John Wolfe O'Connor. Born January 22, 1902, in Nogales, Arizona Territory. His parents divorced when he was 5. His mother moved him and his sister to Tempe. His grandfather taught him to shoot. His grandfather was mainly a bird hunter, but the boy went after big game at an age when most boys were still figuring out the difference between a choke and a boar. He tried to enlist in the army at 15. They sent him home with a diagnosis of chronic tuberculosis. He went to Arizona State Teachers College. He went to the University of Arizona. He went to the University of Missouri for his master's degree in English and came home with a wife named Eleanor Bradford Barry. He became a journalism professor. He became the University of Arizona's first journalism professor. He kept hunting. The summer after high school, he had spent shooting deer to feed his uncle's sawmill workers in Sinaloa, Mexico. Grown men depending on a boy and a rifle, and the skill to put the bullet where the animal could not run from it, he did not miss. He came home from that summer with something that the classroom could not teach and the library could not give him. He came home knowing what a cartridge could do when the man behind it understood the work. He would spend the rest of his life trying to explain that understanding to people who kept arguing about the wrong variables. O'Connor's first article for Outdoor Life ran in 1934, a conservation piece about Arizona antelope. By 1939, he was the magazine's shooting editor, stepping into a desk vacated by a man who had taken his own life. By June of 1941, he was arms and ammunition editor, and he would hold that position until 1972, 31 years, the most read shooting column in American outdoor publishing history. He hunted 12 African countries. He completed 2 Grand Slams of North American wild sheep before the term existed. He took Dall sheep in the Yukon. He took desert bighorn in Sonora. He took elk in the American West, and moose in the North, and grizzlies in country where a miss had consequences that no magazine article could explain adequately. He did most of it with a .270 Winchester. He wrote about the .270 the way a man writes about a country he discovered young and never stopped believing in. The .270 was a Winchester product, built on a neck-down .30-06 case. Its greatest champion was the shooting editor of Outdoor Life. Outdoor Life ran Winchester advertisements. That is not a conspiracy, that is a fact. And the fact sat quietly inside the most influential gun-writing career in American publishing history for 31 years. The argument O'Connor was making was real. The .270 was a genuine cartridge. The 130-grain bullet at 3,140 feet per second was genuinely flat shooting. He was not manufacturing a lie. He was making a case. He was just making it inside an institution that had a financial interest in the case being persuasive. And the other side of the argument he was making required the 30-06 to be something less than it was. Here is what the 30-06 actually was: a 150-grain bullet at 2,900 feet per second, a 180-grain bullet at 2,700 feet per second, and 2,914 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, flat enough to hold minute of elk to 300 yards with a standard 0. Powerful enough that from 1906 through every major American conflict until Korea and beyond, the United States military trusted it to do the most consequential work a cartridge is ever asked to do. 9 elk. All down in the first minute. 22 years. 1 rifle. That is not a marginal cartridge. That is a cartridge that got called marginal because someone had a reason to call it marginal. And that reason had a street address in New York, where the outdoor magazines kept their offices, and a list of advertisers who manufactured the magnums that were going to replace the .06 in the dreams of men who had not yet traded their father's rifles across a counter in Missoula. New Haven, Connecticut, 1962. Winchester has been manufacturing rifles and ammunition since 1866. They understand the American gun market the way a farmer understands weather. They know when to plant and when to let things ripen and when to bring in the harvest before anyone else notices the season is turning. The season in 1962 is the Magnum season. Winchester has the 300 Winchester Magnum ready. It will launch that year. It will go into the Winchester Model 70 rifle, the most respected bolt action on the American market, the rifle O'Connor has been writing about for decades with evident affection. The man Winchester needs for this season is not in New Haven. He is in Lewiston, Idaho, where he had moved in 1948. He is 59 years old. He has hunted more game on more continents than any writer in his magazine's history, and he has a column that reaches more American hunters every month than any competitor in the field. He does not have to be paid to mention the 300 Winchester Magnum. He is going to mention it because he is going to test it, because it is his job to test new cartridges. The magazine that carries his column runs advertisements. The advertisements sell rifles and ammunition. The advertisers are Winchester and Remington and Weatherby and the rest of the industry that has spent 4 decades introducing new cartridges and asking the magazines to explain why the old ones were no longer enough. A man working a night shift at the wire mill in Lewiston, Idaho, or the meatpacking plant in Billings, or the paper mill in Missoula has something in 1962 that his father never had. A 40-hour week that ended on Friday. A Chevrolet in the driveway, a deer rifle in the closet that belonged to his father, and shoots straight, and has never asked more from him than a steady hold and a clean sight picture. He has a week of vacation banked. He has an elk tag in his wallet for October. He reads Outdoor Life the way other men read scripture, which is to say, he reads it to know what to believe. And the column he reads every month is telling him, has been telling him for years now, that what he carries is adequate for deer, that the word for what he needs for elk is something more. He does not question the word. The man who wrote it has been to Africa 12 times. The man who wrote it knows things he does not know. He goes to the gun store. He trades the 30-06. He comes home with a magnum and a new box of ammunition and a problem he will not identify for years, which is that the new cartridge does not fit his shooting and the old one did. What the magazine got from this transaction was advertising revenue and relevance. Every new cartridge required a new article. Every new article required a new comparison. Every comparison required the old cartridge to be found wanting. The 30-06 was not going anywhere. It was going to be there every year to lose the comparison. No formal agreement made the 30-06 lose those comparisons. No editorial policy. No memo from the advertising department to the shooting editor explaining which cartridges to call marginal and which ones to call adequate. It did not need to be written down. It did not need to be said aloud. The institution understood what the institution needed. The shooting editor was an honest man operating inside an institution that rewarded a specific kind of honesty. O'Connor never said the 30-06 was incapable of killing elk. He was too careful a writer for that and too honest a hunter. What he said, across 31 years of columns and articles and books, was that his preference was the .270, and that preference was well-founded, and that the magnums he tested each year had genuine advantages he found interesting. What the reader heard, what Dale Purcell heard driving across Montana in 1961, was something different. What the reader heard was that the rifle his father trusted was not quite enough. That is not what the column said. That is what 40 years of columns, stacked against 40 years of new cartridge introductions, in a magazine funded by the companies introducing those cartridges, accumulated into. The individual articles were honest, the architecture of the argument was not. The .300 Winchester Magnum sold for decades. The 7mm Remington Magnum, introduced the same year, sold for decades. The .300 Weatherby sold for decades. Every Magnum that needed the 30-06 to be marginal sold for decades, and Outdoor Life and American Rifleman and Field and Stream were there for every one of them. 40 years of issues, 40 years of new cartridges requiring new comparisons, the same cartridge losing the same comparison in the same column, while the advertisers who made the new cartridges kept their names on the back pages. O'Connor knew what the 30-06 was. He used one in the Yukon in 1950 to take a Dal ram. He used one on deer. He knew the cartridge the way a professor knows a text he has taught for 30 years, which is to say he knew its strengths and its limits both. And his honest assessment was that for most of what the American hunter was actually doing, the 30-06 was sufficient. But sufficient does not sell a new cartridge. Sufficient does not fill the back pages. He died aboard the SS Mariposa on January 20th, 1978, just 2 days before his 76th birthday, returning from Hawaii. Eleanor was with him. His last published column had run in Peterson's Hunting, the magazine that hired him after he left Outdoor Life in 1972. He never stopped writing. He never stopped hunting. There is no record that he ever formally reconsidered the argument he had been part of building for 3 decades. He understood what the argument was. But understanding an argument and having been the instrument of it are 2 different things. O'Connor had the first. The magazines kept the second. There is a 30-06 in a gun safe in Dillon, Montana, right now. It has been there for 11 years. It belongs to a man named Gary Lindstrom, who bought it off a cousin for $400 when the cousin moved to Phoenix and sold off everything he owned that would not fit in a sedan. Gary has a .270 in the same safe that he bought new in 1997 after reading an article in Field and Stream about elk cartridges. The .270 has killed 7 elk. The 30-06 has killed none, because Gary has told himself since the moment he bought it that it is his deer rifle and the .270 is his elk rifle, and they are not interchangeable, and he has never questioned why he believes that. He does not know why he believes that. He read it somewhere, a long time ago, in a magazine. That 30-06 was built on the same engineering that the United States Army trusted to equip 2 world wars and Korea. The engineering has not changed. The 180-grain bullet is still leaving the muzzle at 2,700 feet per second. It is still hitting an elk with 2,914 foot-pounds of energy if the man behind it puts the bullet where the biology requires it to go. It has always been enough. In 1961, it was enough. In 1978, it was enough. In the safe in Dillon, Montana, it is enough, right now. It has never been anything other than enough. The magazine said otherwise for 40 years, and the magazine had a reason to say otherwise, and Gary Lindstrom's safe has the proof of what that reason cost. The 30-06 has never let anyone down who asked it to do the work it was built for. There are 2 men at a hunting camp outside Cody, Wyoming, right now. One of them is shooting a .300 Winchester Magnum, and he is convinced it was the right decision, and the $2,000 he spent on the rifle and the glass and the ammunition was worth it. The other man is shooting a .30-aught. 6. His uncle left him, and he is not entirely sure it is enough, and he has been not entirely sure since he read something in a magazine years ago that he cannot precisely remember, but cannot entirely forget. Both of them are right about something. Neither of them knows what the magazine was doing when it helped them arrive at their opinions. Both of them bought ammunition from companies that advertised in those magazines. Neither got a vote in the argument the industry built around the cartridge one of them is holding. The magazine cover says Field and Stream, the column says 270, the cartridge in the chambered rifle says 30-06. It was always enough. The column knew it, the advertiser knew it too. That is why it had to go.